They told me I was lucky to get the job, that Walker House wasn't the kind of place that just hired anyone, especially not for night shifts. But after months of struggling to find work, I didn't think twice. A historic inn nestled in the heart of Mineral Point, Wisconsin, Walker House had been around since the 1800s, and its stone walls were steeped in history. When I got the call saying I was hired as the new night chef, I packed my knives, left Milwaukee, and headed west. My first impression of the place was something I can't fully explain. It wasn't just the old world charm or the creaking wooden floors. It was a feeling, like the house had eyes and was watching me from the moment I stepped through the front door. The manager, a soft-spoken older man named Mr. Whitaker, greeted me with a handshake that lingered too long. His eyes didn't blink much. He gave me a quick tour of the kitchen, the narrow hallways, and the storage rooms below ground level. Then he handed me a single piece of paper. "These are the house rules," he said. "They are non-negotiable. Memorize them. Follow them." I unfolded the yellowed sheet and read each line carefully. They weren't your typical kitchen protocols. 1. Always enter through the back door between 9:50 p.m. and 10 p.m. Not before, not after. 2. Never start prepping before 10:15 p.m., even if you're early. 3. Do not speak to the servers. They're not part of the staff. 4. The pantry door must remain closed at all times. If you find it open, shut it immediately. If you hear someone whisper your name from the dumbwaiter, do not respond. 6. At 2 a.m., place a plate of raw meat by the back stairs. Do not look at who takes it. 7. Leave by 4 a.m. sharp. No exceptions. I chuckled nervously and looked up. "Is this a joke?" Mr. Whitaker didn't laugh. "Do I look like someone who jokes?" I swallowed hard. "Guess not." He clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Good. You'll do fine here if you remember one thing. This house is older than any of us, and it remembers everything." That first night, I arrived in my rusted-out Ford Fusion and parked in the gravel lot behind the house. The clock on the dashboard read 9:55 p.m. I took a deep breath and walked to the back door. As I pulled it open, I felt the weight of something pass over me, like walking through a dense fog. The hallway inside was dimly lit and cold despite the midsummer heat. I checked my phone. 9:59 p.m. Right on time. I waited in the break room until 10:15, watching the second hand tick by. It felt ridiculous, sitting there doing nothing when I could be slicing vegetables or organizing the line. But I wasn't about to break a rule on my first night. At exactly 10:15, I stepped into the kitchen. The space was cleaner than I expected. Rustic, but functional. Cast iron pans hung from hooks like medieval weapons, and a long butcher's block sat under a stained glass window depicting a cornucopia. I began organizing my station: diced onions, peeled garlic, trimmed herbs. I found comfort in the rhythm of it. Then I heard the bell above the dumbwaiter chime. I paused. It chimed again, then again. I walked over and peered into the shaft. Empty. No food tray, no note. Just the small wooden compartment and the hollow echo of the stone shaft. Then I heard it, a whisper. It was my name. I froze. The whisper was faint, like someone speaking from inside a cave. "Daniel." My hands trembled. I stepped back. The rule came flooding into my mind. Do not respond. I turned my back and focused on the chopping board, my heart hammering in my chest. The whisper came again. Closer. "Daniel." I slammed a pot onto the stove and started sautéing onions, drowning the whisper in sizzles. After a while, the voice faded. Around midnight, I noticed someone moving in the hallway. A girl in a black and white uniform carrying a tray. She glided past the open door silently, never making eye contact. A server? I almost called out, but remembered rule number 3. Do not speak to the servers. They're not part of the staff? Not part of the staff? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe Walker House had some old school tradition of historical servers in costume for night events. Still, something about her movements unsettled me. Too smooth. Too silent. The rest of the shift went by in a blur of stress and second guessing. I barely noticed the time until the wall clock struck 2. Rule number 6, I opened the cold storage and retrieved the tray I had prepped earlier. Raw steak, rare cuts, seasoned with sea salt and rosemary, exactly as Mr. Whitaker had instructed. I carried the plate to the back stairs and placed it at the top step. The stairs spiraled into darkness below. I couldn't see the bottom. I waited, breath held. Footsteps echoed up the stairs, heavy, uneven, slow. I wanted to run, but I stood frozen. Something reached up, long fingers, too many joints, and took the plate. Then the footsteps retreated into the dark. I didn't look. I couldn't. At exactly 4 a.m., I packed up and left through the back door. As I reached my car, I glanced up at the house. There was someone in the third-floor window, staring down at me, pale, still, watching. I didn't sleep that day. I just lay in my rented room, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what I'd seen, what I'd heard. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I'd made up my mind. I would go back. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed answers. And maybe deep down, I was already trapped. My second night at Walker House felt different before I even stepped foot inside. The sun had barely set, but the sky was an unnatural shade of violet as I drove the winding roads leading to Mineral Point. A thick mist hugged the trees along the highway, making it feel like the town had wrapped itself in a veil. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt. Still, I parked behind the house right on schedule, 9:54 p.m. I waited in the car, engine idling, as the clock ticked toward the allowed entry window. At 9:59, I shut off the engine and stepped out. There were no stars in the sky, just that low-hanging fog that clung to the old stone building like moss. The back door opened easily, same sharp chill inside. I walked in and was met by the quiet hum of fluorescent lights. I passed the same hallways, the same peeling wallpaper, and sat in the break room for those mandatory 15 minutes. I couldn't stop glancing at the paper tucked in my apron, the rules. I'd reread them a dozen times already, but I needed the reminder. By 10:15, I was back in the kitchen. The silence was louder tonight, the kind of silence that isn't empty, but waiting. Every creak of the floorboard sounded intentional, like footsteps just out of view. I went through my motions, lit the burners, pulled ingredients, laid out prep trays. But I was more alert tonight, watching shadows that didn't behave like they should, listening for voices in the dumbwaiter. The bell rang at 10:37. I didn't move. It rang again, and then a third time. No whisper followed, just the heavy presence of something on the other side. I avoided eye contact with the dumbwaiter and instead focused on my cutting board. Every now and then, I caught a flicker in my peripheral vision, the compartment opening and closing slowly as if breathing. But I kept to the rules. I didn't respond. At 11:10, one of the servers passed the kitchen again. This time it was a man, tall, older, with dark hair and sunken eyes. His uniform was clean but dated, something out of the 1940s. He carried a tray with a single covered dish. He didn't look at me. He just kept walking. I almost spoke to him. Almost. But the moment my mouth opened, he stopped mid-step. His head turned just slightly, like he was waiting to see if I'd break the rule. I shut my mouth and turned back to the stove. After a moment, he moved on. I was beginning to understand something unspoken about Walker House. It wasn't just haunted, it was alive. And the rules weren't just tradition, they were protection. By midnight, the kitchen had grown unbearably hot. The old ventilation system groaned, trying to keep up with the stoves, but the air felt thick and wet, like breathing through steam. I paused to wipe sweat from my forehead, and that's when I heard the pantry door creak open. Rule number 4. I turned around. The pantry was wide open. The overhead light inside flickered erratically. Inside, the shelves were lined with canned goods and sacks of flour, but at the very back, where the light didn't reach, I thought I saw something move. I walked over quickly and slammed the door shut. It resisted at first, like something was holding it open. Then, with a harsh snap, it closed. I locked the bolt. From the other side came a sound, not banging, not scratching, something worse. Breathing. Something was inside that pantry. And now it knew I was too. I took several steps back, watching the door. It didn't move again, but the temperature in the room dropped sharply. I could see my breath as I returned to the stove. At 2 a.m., I carried the plate of raw meat to the back stairs again. This time I was trembling before I even reached the landing. The darkness below felt deeper tonight, like it was drawing the light out of the hallway. I placed the plate down, turned around, and didn't wait. But as I walked away, I heard footsteps again, and then the sound of chewing, wet, guttural, animal-like. Something was eating. I didn't look, not even when the chewing stopped, and a long sigh echoed up the stairwell. Just before 3 a.m., the kitchen lights flickered and went out completely. I froze. The emergency lights kicked in a moment later, bathing the kitchen in a red glow. I turned slowly and found the tall server standing in the doorway. But now his face was wrong. Too pale, eyes too sunken, mouth slightly open, revealing rows of discolored teeth. He was staring straight at me. I stepped back, heart pounding, gripping a carving knife in my hand. I didn't say anything, I whispered, more to myself than to him. I followed the rules. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. From behind him, others began to gather. More servers, the girl from the night before, another in a torn waistcoat, a woman with half her face missing. They stood at the edges of the emergency light, never stepping into the full glow, just watching, waiting. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, they turned and walked out, one by one, into the hall, leaving behind a cold that soaked into my bones. The lights returned at 3:14 a.m. I dropped the knife and sat down on the cold tile floor, trying to slow my breathing. At 4 a.m. sharp, I left through the back door. The sky outside was still pitch black, but something followed me into the lot. I heard footsteps behind me, even though I was alone. I unlocked the car, climbed in, and slammed the door shut. When I looked in the rearview mirror, there was a handprint on the back window. Small, child-sized. It hadn't been there before. I didn't sleep that day either. Walker House wasn't just haunted. It was playing with me, testing me. And if I was going to survive whatever this place was, I needed to learn more. I decided that the next night, I wouldn't just follow the rules. I'd try to find out where they came from and who or what had written them. I spent most of the day sitting on the floor of my rented room, staring at the folded paper of rules. Not a single letter on that yellowed page had changed, but now every sentence felt heavier. It was more than ink. It was warning, bound by something I didn't understand. That afternoon, I called the manager, Mr. Whitaker, hoping for answers. "You've been doing fine, Daniel," he said calmly over the phone. "You're following the rules, and that's more than most. Don't ask questions. Just keep cooking." "What happens if I don't?" I asked. The silence on the line stretched for too long. Then, finally, he spoke. "You don't want to find out. Click." I should have quit right then. Should have packed my things and driven away from this cursed place. But I couldn't. Something about the house had sunk its claws into me. There were too many questions. And deep down, a part of me needed to know the truth. That night, I arrived at the usual time, 9:56 p.m. Fog hung even thicker than the night before. The gravel under my boots was damp, and the air smelled like old copper. I stepped through the back door at exactly 9:59. This time, the fog followed me inside. It didn't retreat until I reached the break room. By 10:15, I was on the line again. For the first hour, nothing strange happened. I cooked, I prepped, I kept my ears open. Then I noticed something unusual. On the spice rack above the stove, there was a small bottle I hadn't seen before, a black glass jar labeled only with a symbol, something between a rune and a sigil. Definitely not English, not even Latin. I reached for it, and the moment my fingers brushed the glass, I felt a shock, like static snapping up my arm. I dropped it. The bottle hit the counter, but didn't break. It just rolled in a slow, deliberate circle before coming to a stop, facing the pantry. I stared at the pantry door. It was closed, still locked. But I could feel it. Whatever was inside knew I had touched something that didn't belong. I put the jar back exactly where I found it. At 10:47 p.m., I decided to test the theory. I pulled my phone from my pocket, turned on the audio recorder, and placed it inside the dumbwaiter. If it whispered again tonight, I wanted proof. I returned to my prep station and waited. At 11:13, the bell rang. Once, twice, 3 times. The recorder was still in the dumbwaiter, red light blinking. Then a voice whispered my name. "Daniel," and then again. But this time it was layered, like 2 voices overlapping. One was my voice. The other wasn't human. "Daniel." I resisted the urge to look. I just waited for the voice to stop. After a full minute, the dumbwaiter was silent. I retrieved my phone and played the audio. Nothing, just silence. No bells, no whispers, not even kitchen sounds. It was like the recording had been swallowed by the house. Midnight passed quietly, almost too quietly. At 12:40, the girl server returned. She didn't carry a tray this time. She simply stood in the hallway outside the kitchen staring at me. I kept my eyes down, focused on slicing onions. She stepped closer. Her shoes didn't make a sound. I could see her reflection in the blade. Her face was blank, eyes black as ink. Then she whispered something, a word I didn't understand, soft and quick. Kesmarek. The lights flickered. I dropped the knife. When I looked up again, she was gone. I stood there for a long while, breathing heavily, trying to hold on to my grip on reality. Kesmarek. What the hell did it mean? At 2 a.m., I carried the plate to the back stairs again. This time, I didn't linger. But as I turned to leave, something spoke from the stairwell. Not a whisper, not a moan, a voice. Deep, old, guttural. Bring it yourself. I froze in place. I wasn't supposed to respond. I knew that. But something pulled at me. Like invisible strings tugging behind my eyes, I took one step toward the stairs, then another. The darkness at the bottom seemed to stretch further than before, impossibly deep. A hand gripped my shoulder. I spun around, heart in my throat. No one was there. But the hallway was filled with fog, cold, heavy, writhing around my ankles like smoke. Then I heard it again. Bring it yourself. I dropped the plate and ran. By the time I made it back to the kitchen, the dumbwaiter was open. Inside sat a folded note. I approached cautiously, hand trembling as I picked it up. One sentence was written in crimson ink. You're being watched. I crumpled the note and threw it into the trash, chest heaving. When the clock struck 4 a.m., I didn't hesitate. I bolted out the back door and sprinted to my car. I didn't look at the windows this time. I didn't want to know who or what might be watching me from the upper floors. Back at the motel, I searched for the word Kesmarek. Only one result showed up. It was a surname tied to a long-forgotten Eastern European ritual involving the feeding of a spirit locked beneath a house. A deal made generations ago to protect a family from ruin. But if the offering stopped, or if the rules were broken, the spirit would rise and consume the living. The house, the rules, the raw meat. Suddenly, everything made a twisted kind of sense. Walker House wasn't just haunted. It was fed, and I was the one doing the feeding. I didn't return the next night. Instead, I sat in the motel room, curtains drawn, lights off, staring at the wall with that single name stuck in my head like a nail, Kesmarek. I kept thinking about the voice from the stairs. It hadn't just spoken, it had commanded me, as if I'd been expected to obey, as if the rules were no longer just rules, but a challenge, a test. I didn't sleep again, but not out of fear. This time, it was strategy. I needed to approach this with a clear head. So around noon, I drove to the Mineral Point Library. I figured there had to be some public records, some dusty old book that mentioned Walker House. And I was right. After several hours of digging, I found what I was looking for. A thin, brittle volume titled Mineral Point and Its Forgotten Graves. One chapter was dedicated entirely to Walker House. According to the record, the building had served many purposes over its long history. An inn, a tavern, a temporary hospital during a cholera outbreak in the 1800s, and even briefly, a funeral home. But there was one passage, almost hidden between entries, that chilled me. In 1863, following a string of unexplained disappearances of guests and workers, the owner, Henrik Kesmarek, vanished without a trace. Townsfolk reported lights in the upper windows at night and sounds of chewing from the cellar, even when the house was unoccupied. The property changed hands multiple times, but the disappearances continued. Eventually, the home was sold to a private owner who forbade all public access. That changed in 1987, when it was restored and reopened as a historic inn. I stared at the page. Kesmarek. He wasn't just a ghost. He was the origin. He had made the deal, fed the thing beneath the house, bound it with rules, and now I was part of it. That night, against every ounce of instinct in my body, I went back. The house had me. I knew it. I could feel the pull in my bones. 9:58 p.m. Backlot. Same mist, same thick silence. As I reached the door, I saw something new. Scratches. Deep ones, gouged into the frame like something with claws had tried to escape or get in. I hesitated, then opened the door and stepped inside. The air was warmer tonight, not in a comforting way, more like the inside of an animal's mouth, wet, heavy, and sour. I checked the time, 10 exactly. I made tea in the break room and sat, heart thudding against my ribs. Then at 10:15, I entered the kitchen. Everything was as I left it, but this time something had been added. A new note, pinned to the fridge with a rusty cleaver. The rules are changing. That was it. No explanation, no instructions, just a warning. My hands shook as I removed the cleaver and tucked the note into my apron. I checked the pantry, still locked. The spice rack, unchanged. The dumbwaiter, closed and silent. I kept to the tasks I knew. Peeled potatoes, diced shallots, made soup stock, familiar things, safe things. But there was no such thing as safe here. At 11 p.m., the girl returned. She didn't walk this time. She stood in the far end of the hallway and glided toward me, her dress fluttering like it was underwater. As she approached the door, she opened her mouth, not to speak, but to exhale. Black mist poured from her lips and floated into the kitchen like smoke. She raised her hand slowly and pointed toward the dumbwaiter. Then she vanished. The bell chimed. Once, twice, then 5 times in rapid succession. I walked to it with slow, unsteady steps. Inside sat a box, a small wooden one with an iron latch. No note, no markings. I didn't touch it. Instead, I slid the dumbwaiter closed and backed away. I turned around to find the tall male server from before standing behind me. Only this time, he looked fresh, alive, as if he'd stepped out of a photograph from another era. He wore a crisp vest and an apron stained with what looked like wine or blood. He placed a single key on the counter. No words, no motion. He simply disappeared. I stared at the key. It was old, iron, with teeth like jagged bones. I knew what it opened, the pantry. For a full 10 minutes I paced the kitchen, debating whether to use it. Every part of my brain screamed no, but something stronger pushed me toward the door. I placed the key into the lock and turned it. It clicked open with a deep mechanical groan, like something ancient grinding into motion for the first time in centuries. The pantry light flickered on. I opened the door. The shelves were as I remembered them, but the back wall was gone. Instead, a narrow tunnel led into the stone beneath the house. I took one step in, then another. The air grew colder with each step, and I could smell dirt, rot, and something metallic. The tunnel ended in a circular chamber. Bones littered the floor, human, animal, some too twisted to tell the difference. In the center stood a table, on it a ledger. I approached and opened it. Inside were names, dozens of them, each listed with dates beside them, arrival and disappearance. Then I found my name, Daniel Mercer, July 9th, in progress. I heard a scraping behind me. I turned and something crawled from the shadows, massive, pale, and thin. Its body was stretched too long, too many limbs, slick with blood and filth. It didn't attack, it just watched. Its eyes were sunken but intelligent, old. It nodded slowly, as if recognizing me, as if approving. I backed away, heart hammering in my ears, and sprinted through the tunnel, slamming the pantry door shut behind me. I didn't even cook that night. At 4 a.m., I left. In my rearview mirror, I saw someone standing in the middle of the road behind me. Mr. Whitaker, smiling, holding the same cleaver from earlier. I didn't go home after that shift. I drove past my motel and kept going until I reached the town limits, not stopping until I reached a truck stop off the highway. I sat in the parking lot for what felt like hours, hands gripping the wheel, trying to calm the rising panic inside me. I couldn't forget what I'd seen in the chamber. The creature, the ledger with my name already written, the tunnel hidden behind the pantry. None of it made sense in any logical world, but logic had left me the moment I walked into Walker House. At around 9 a.m., I finally gathered the nerve to call Mr. Whitaker. He answered after 2 rings. "You saw it, didn't you?" he said, before I could speak. "You knew," I said through gritted teeth. "You knew what's down there." "It's not a matter of knowing," he replied, calm as ever. "It's a matter of respect. The rules are old, older than the house, older than me, and older than you'll ever be. That thing below, it doesn't want chaos. It wants order, obedience. So long as the rules are followed, everyone stays alive." "Then why is my name in the ledger?" I asked. There was a pause. "Because once you see it, it sees you back." He hung up. I screamed into the steering wheel. I wanted to leave, to disappear, but something wouldn't let me. The deeper I got into this, the more I understood. I was no longer an outsider. I was part of the pattern now. The feeding, the watching, and the rules, they were no longer just instructions. They were survival. That night, I returned at exactly 9:59 p.m. It felt like walking into the mouth of a creature that was expecting me. The back door creaked open on its own. The hallway was darker than usual. No lights flickered on, just the faint glow from the kitchen ahead. Inside, everything was ready for me. All my tools laid out, ingredients placed on the counter like offerings. And in the center of the prep table was a new rule sheet. Different handwriting, sloppier, rushed, like someone had scribbled it while bleeding out. New addendum to rules. 1. Do not whistle after 1 a.m. 2. If you hear music playing, you must dance, even if you're alone. 3. Do not touch the figure in the walk-in freezer. 4. If the cleaver disappears, run. 5. Someone will knock 3 times at 3:33 a.m. Do not open the door. Below the list, a handwritten note in faded ink. Some of us tried to break the rules. This is what's left. I read the list twice. Music? Dancing? A figure in the freezer? The walk-in freezer hadn't even been unlocked before tonight. I steeled myself and got to work. I couldn't afford to panic. As long as I followed every word, I'd survive. Midnight came and went. At 12:43 a.m., I heard it. Music. Faint, coming from the dining hall. A slow, eerie waltz played by something that didn't care about tempo or rhythm. It was warped, like an old record dragged across broken needles. Rule number 2. Dance. My heart sank. I stepped into the hallway and moved in time with the music, awkwardly, hesitantly, just enough to mimic the shape of a dance. As I did, the servers emerged from the walls. No footsteps, just gliding. They lined the hallway, watching me. No smiles, no blinking. One of them, the tall one with black eyes, nodded, and the music stopped. They faded back into the darkness. I stumbled back into the kitchen, drenched in sweat. At 1:07 a.m., I caught myself whistling softly under my breath. A tune I didn't even recognize. My hand flew to my mouth, too late. The lights snapped off. Total darkness. Then something screamed from inside the walk-in freezer. It wasn't a human sound. It was rage, betrayal, hunger. The freezer door began to rattle violently as if something inside was clawing to be let out. I backed away, muttering apologies, begging whatever it was to stay inside. After a minute, the lights returned. The freezer door was still, but a handprint had formed on the inside of the glass window. It was upside down, and it had 6 fingers. I kept working, eyes darting between the rules, the clock, and the hallway. At 2 a.m., I left the raw meat at the stairs, just like always. This time, I didn't hear footsteps, just breathing, long, drawn-out, rattling breaths, followed by a whisper, "You're changing." I didn't know what that meant. I didn't want to know. At 3:10 a.m., I noticed something strange. The cleaver, the one always hanging by the fridge, was gone. Rule number 4. My chest tightened. I began backing toward the exit. Then I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming from the hallway. I turned off the lights and ducked behind the prep counter. The footsteps entered the kitchen. I could hear breathing, labored, wet, then silence. The cleaver clattered to the floor beside me. The sound echoed for far too long. When I opened my eyes, the kitchen was empty. At 3:33 a.m. sharp, 3 knocks echoed from the back door, slow, even, loud enough to shake the pans hanging above the stove. I didn't move. The knocks came again. 3. Only 3, then silence. But something scratched at the bottom of the door. A slow, dragging scrape, like a nail trailing across wood. Then another knock, but not at the door, at the window. I didn't look. I waited. The clock finally struck 4 a.m., and I ran. Outside, the air smelled like sulfur. Thick fog blanketed the lot, and all the windows of Walker House were glowing a dull red. Something had changed. The rules were no longer keeping the house in check. They were keeping me in. I didn't drive away this time. Instead, I sat in my car until the sun began to rise, clutching the blood-smeared cleaver that had been dropped at my feet just hours earlier. It was still warm when I picked it up. I hadn't told anyone about Walker House, not friends, not family. I wasn't even sure if anyone would believe me. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized it didn't matter. Belief was irrelevant. This place operated on its own laws, its own logic, and I had broken one of the rules. I whistled. I didn't mean to, but the house didn't care. There were no warnings, no second chances, only consequences. By noon, I was back at the library, digging for anything I could find on Kesmarek, the ledger, the creature in the basement. I scanned old death records, land deeds, even newspaper articles from over a century ago. One article from 1864 caught my attention. The title, "Local Innkeeper Vanishes, Strange Rituals Rumored at Walker House." The article mentioned Henrik Kesmarek's abrupt disappearance, rumors of bodies found in the cellar, And most disturbingly, the phrase, "the eater below," scratched into the stone wall behind the pantry. The same pantry I had opened, the same chamber I had entered. The creature hadn't harmed me yet, but it was watching. And now, more than ever, I could feel it inside the house, breathing, waiting. That night, as I approached Walker House, the air was heavier. There were no crickets, no wind, just dead silence and a single crow perched on the rooftop, cawing in short, rhythmic bursts, 3 times, pause, 3 more, like it was mimicking the knock from the night before. 9:59 p.m. I entered. The hallway was damp. Water dripped from the ceiling, even though there hadn't been any rain. A low, thrumming vibration ran beneath the floor, like the heartbeat of a buried animal. I reached the kitchen. Everything was different. The walls were darker, like they'd been scorched. My knives were still on the prep table, but there was something new beside them. A photograph. It was old, black and white, curled edges. It showed me, standing in the kitchen, staring into the camera, a blank expression on my face. But behind me in the photo, the dumbwaiter door was open, and something pale and faceless was crawling out. There was no date. I dropped it and stepped away, heart pounding. Then I saw the newest revision of the rule sheet, taped to the pantry door. Revised rules, week of July 3rd. 1. Do not use your own reflection to check your appearance. 2. If you hear crying from the bathroom, leave the building. 3. The server in room 6 is not real. Do not let him speak. 4. You may receive a phone call. Do not answer unless it rings 4 times exactly. 5. If you smell lavender, pray. I tore it down, stuffed it into my apron, and began prepping. At 10:22 p.m., the mirror above the sink began to fog over. I caught my reflection twitching. I turned away. At 10:40 p.m., the crying started. Not distant, not muffled, but right outside the kitchen. A woman's sobs. Shallow, broken. I clutched the cleaver, moved to the hallway, and stood there, not moving. The sound came from the bathroom near the dining hall. I backed away. I didn't leave the building. I should have. Instead, I returned to the kitchen, pretending it wasn't happening. At 11:07 p.m., I passed by the dumbwaiter and found another photo inside. This time it showed me, standing in front of the freezer with the door open behind me, and a figure inside, smiling. The cleaver dropped from my hand. Something whispered from the pantry behind me. I turned slowly, dread crawling through every vein. The door was ajar again, wide enough for something to watch. I approached it slowly. It wasn't the tunnel this time. Instead, the shelves had been rearranged, and on the top shelf behind jars of pickled onions was a new object, a phone. Old-fashioned rotary dial, black. It began to ring, once, twice, 3 times. I raised my hand, hesitated, then the 4th ring. I picked it up, silence, then breathing, then a voice, faint, distorted. You're running out of nights. Click. I stared at the phone. No dial tone. I put it down and turned, only to find the tall server in room 6 standing in the kitchen doorway. He was soaked in something dark, his mouth opened, lips barely moving. Don't feed it anymore, he said. I blinked. When I looked again, he was gone. At 2 a.m., I took the plate of raw meat to the stairs again. This time I hesitated. The house was trying to tell me something. Don't feed it anymore. I placed the plate on the prep table instead and waited. Nothing happened. The house felt still, silent. Then every light in the kitchen exploded at once. A wind howled from the hallway. Doors slammed, and the pantry burst open with a thunderous crash. The creature, pale, spindly, monstrous, stood in the doorway, head tilted. It had no eyes, no mouth, yet I felt its rage, its hunger. You're running out of nights, I whispered aloud. It stepped back into the pantry and vanished into the tunnel, but I knew this was a warning. I hadn't fed it, and it noticed. I didn't wait for the clock. I ran, through the hallway, down the stairs, out the back door, and as I fumbled to unlock my car, I looked back once. All the windows of Walker House were filled with silhouettes, staring down at me, silent, patient, waiting. The house wasn't going to let me go, not until I fed it again.